Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to unpack an ancient story about a massive communication breakdown that honestly feels like it could have happened yesterday. It's a powerful story all about doubt, judgment, and the crushing weight of unmet expectations. I mean, have you ever been in that spot where it feels like no matter what you do, you just can't win? You try one thing, and people criticize you. So you try the exact opposite, and guess what? They criticize you for that too. It is such a frustrating, completely exhausting place to be, and it is right at the heart of the crisis we're looking at today. So, our story really centers on this guy, John the Baptist. Now, he was a huge deal, a really powerful, influential prophet. But when we catch up with him here, his world has been turned upside down. He's locked away in a dungeon in this bleak fortress called Machaerus out near the Dead Sea. And it's in that darkness that this crisis of expectation really starts to take hold. To really get what's going on in his head, you just have to look at his journey. He starts out with absolute, rock-solid certainty. But after he gets thrown in prison for, courageously speaking truth to power, that confidence starts to crack. And from his cell, he sends his followers to ask Jesus that one single doubt-filled question. See, John was expecting a Messiah who would bring this big political deliverance, maybe even bust him out of jail, but that just wasn't happening. And it turns out, John wasn't the only one who was confused. The public had its own set of totally rigid and frankly contradictory expectations for what a spiritual leader should look like. On one hand, you had John, this intense, disciplined prophet from the wilderness, and then you had Jesus, who was social, going to dinners, and hanging out with the total outcasts of society. The people had these two completely different models in front of them, and as we're about to see, they basically decided neither one was good enough. Jesus just nails the problem with this brilliant analogy. He compares the people of his generation to these fickle kids playing games in the marketplace. You know the type. You play a happy wedding song on the flute for them, and they refuse to dance. Then you sing a sad funeral song, and they refuse to mourn. Basically, their minds are already made up to criticize, and they will find a reason no matter what you do. So, what was their big judgment against John for his incredibly disciplined, austere lifestyle? Did they see it as spiritual devotion? Nope. They just slapped a harsh label on him. He has a demon. It was quick, definitive, and just dripping with criticism. And what about Jesus, who took the complete opposite approach? The judgment was just as fast and just as harsh. They labeled him a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of sinners. What's so wild here is when you put these two criticisms side by side, you see the trap. It reveals a mindset that is literally impossible to satisfy. From a modern communication lens, like nonviolent communication, we'd call this the language of judgment. It's a way of talking that doesn't actually describe what's happening. Instead, it just slaps a moralistic label on everything. And this style of communication, well, it's not designed to understand, it's designed to criticize, and it pretty much always creates disconnection and conflict. So how does Jesus deal with this? How does he respond to this trap of judgment, and especially to John's question full of doubt? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. He doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself with more opinions. Instead, he just cuts right through all the noise by completely changing the way they're talking. His instruction to John's disciples is so profound. He doesn't say, go tell John my opinion or go tell him my credentials. He says, go back and report on what is concrete, what is verifiable, what you can actually observe. He's shifting the whole focus away from subjective evaluation and onto objective reality. And this list just brilliantly illustrates that core principle of observation over evaluation. The blind see, the lame walk. I mean, these aren't debatable judgments, are they? They're undeniable facts. He's essentially telling John, hey, don't get tangled up in whether I fit your expectations. Just look at what is actually happening. It is such a powerful way to ground a conversation in reality instead of getting lost in a fog of criticism. Okay, so this leads to a huge turning point in the story. After dealing with the critics and John's doubt, Jesus offers up a prayer. And in this prayer, he totally redefines what it means to be wise and who is actually able to get his message. I mean, wow, this is a radical statement. He's thankful that his message is hidden from the people who think they're so wise and prudent. The experts, the intellectuals, the critics who are so certain in their own judgments. Instead, he says real understanding has been revealed to babes. So the crucial point here isn't about how smart you are. It's all about your posture, your attitude.
The Ys are the ones with rigid expectations and minds set on judging. They're so busy evaluating everything they can't see the reality that's right in front of them. The Babes, on the other hand, are open, teachable, and humble. They aren't trapped by their own cleverness, so they're the ones who can actually receive something new.
So, after all that, what's the solution? After diagnosing this exhausting crisis of expectation and judgment, Jesus offers this incredibly profound and personal invitation. It's the answer for anyone who is just worn out by this whole cycle.
And let's be real, this speaks directly to us today. Whether it's the burden of our own inner critic or the weight of trying to meet the endless contradictory expectations of other people, that feeling of being heavy laden is a universal human experience. We all know what that feels like.
So, what's the answer to all this weariness? It's not to just try harder or get better at meeting expectations. No, it's a radical invitation to a completely different way of living. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. This is the heart of it, the core of the solution. It's a direct call to find relief, not in some system or a new philosophy, but in a person.
Now, this is fascinating. When Jesus says, "My yoke is easy," if you look at the original Greek, the word is chrestos. And chrestos doesn't just mean easy like effortless. It also means well-fitting. See, back then, a good craftsman would make a yoke specifically for one particular ox, carving it to fit its shoulders perfectly so it wouldn't hurt it. So the invitation isn't to a life with no burden at all, but to a life with a burden that is tailor-made just for you and one that's shared.
And this path to rest unfolds in these really clear steps. It all starts with a personal response. Come. Then it means choosing to take my yoke, to actually enter into this partnership where you're not carrying the whole load alone. The third step is to learn, to adopt this new, gentle, non-judgmental way of being. And the result of that whole process? It's the profound promise of finding true rest for your soul. So let's end with this thought to chew on. This whole story kicks off with a crisis fueled by harsh judgments from other people and even from within. What if the solution, this easy and well-fitting yoke, is really an invitation to escape that very trap? A call to live a life that's defined not by the heavy burden of constant evaluation, but by the lightness of compassion, observation, and empathy for others, and maybe most importantly, for ourselves.